Catherine Albright surveyed the holographic model of the Blackwood Preserve development from the head of a 30-foot obsidian table. The model shimmered, a ghost of glass and light depicting a future of sterile corporate campuses and luxury condominiums where attractive, messy, inconvenient reality currently stood. Her world was one of clean lines, leveraged assets, and swift, unsentimental decisions. Her gaze, sharp and analytical, swept over the data streams projected onto the smart glass walls of the 40th floor boardroom. She wore a severe, tailored suit of charcoal wool that cost more than the car most people drove. Her focus narrowed on a single, irritating line item blinking red in the corner of one projection: asset liquidation, sector Gamma 7. "David," she said, her voice cutting through the climate-controlled silence. Her tone was not one of inquiry, but of command. It held no warmth, only the expectation of immediate, accurate information. A young analyst named David Chen, perched nervously at the far end of the table, flinched almost imperceptibly. He straightened his tie. "Yes, Mistress Albright. Sector Gamma 7 is the old Northline haulage depot. The land acquisition is complete, but we have the matter of the remaining physical assets." Assets. Catherine's lip curled slightly, a minute expression of distaste. "My site survey described it as a junkyard. 47 derelict semi-trucks, a collapsing maintenance garage. These are not assets, David. They are liabilities. They are an eyesore and an obstacle. Technically, the trucks belong to their former owner-operators," David offered, consulting his tablet. "Northline acted as their dispatcher and financial agent. When Northline went bankrupt, the drivers' contracts were voided, and their trucks were left on the property we acquired. We've had them towed to an impound lot to clear the land, per legal guidance." "Fine," she clipped. "And the cost?" "The towing and storage fees are accumulating," David said, his voice hesitant. He knew she would hate this part. For the 47 vehicles, the total bill is already approaching $1.2 million. The drivers, they can't pay. They've effectively lost their livelihoods. Catherine Albright made a dismissive gesture with a perfectly manicured hand. The plight of 47 anonymous truckers was as abstract to her as the mineral composition of a distant moon. They were a rounding error in a multi-billion-dollar project. Their financial status is not our concern. The liability is. The impound lot will eventually file for the titles to cover their costs. How long will that take? 6 months. Maybe 9, with legal challenges, David answered. It's a slow process. And in the meantime, the negative press from the local truckers' union is persistent. She sighed, a sound of profound impatience. I want that land cleared for groundbreaking in 60 days. I will not have this project stalled by a fleet of rust buckets and the whining of their former owners. And I will not carry this liability on the books for another quarter. What is in the garage? Scrap, mostly. Old tools, parts, office furniture. Nothing of recorded value. Then liquidate it, she commanded, her eyes already moving to the next agenda item, the problem solved in her mind. Sell the contents of that garage to the first scrap hauler who makes an offer. I don't care if it's for $1. Just get a signed bill of sale that transfers all contents, seen and unseen, and get it off my desk. Is that understood? Yes, Mistress Albright, David said, making a note. He felt a small, sour knot in his stomach. The coldness of the decision, the complete lack of regard for the lives it was appending, was standard operating procedure, but today it felt particularly grim. Miles away, in a world that could not have been more different, Elias Vance worked in a state of quiet grace. His garage was small, a single-bay cinder-block building behind a modest clapboard house, but it was as clean and orderly as a surgical theater. Tools hung on pegboards in a precise, logical array. Jars of screws, bolts, and washers were neatly labeled on wooden shelves. The air smelled of solvent, clean oil, and old iron. There was no clutter, only purpose. Elias himself, dressed in worn flannel and denim, moved with an unhurried deliberation. His hands, though calloused and stained with grease, were steady and precise as he reassembled the intricate linkages of a vintage carburetor. On a small, sturdy wooden stool in the corner, his daughter Lily sat, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was 8 years old, with her father's serious eyes and dark hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She was not drawing a princess or a flower, but a detailed, surprisingly accurate diagram of a differential gear set she had seen her father working on the week before. The silence between them was not empty, it was a shared space of focus and contentment, a language they had perfected since her mother's passing 5 years prior. His world had shrunk then, from the sprawling, high-pressure environment of corporate engineering to the sacred confines of this small garage and the even smaller world of his daughter's needs. He had chosen this life. He had chosen obscurity. Lily looked up from her drawing, her pencil pausing. "Is that one from before?" she asked, her small voice clear in the quiet garage. Elias didn't stop his work, his fingers deftly seating a tiny spring. "No, this is just a Holly 4-barrel. An old one. For Mr. Henderson's pickup truck. Not like the ones from Vanguard," she pressed. Elias finally paused. He looked at the complex piece of metal in his hands, then at his daughter. A shadow of a memory passed over his features. "No, not like the ones from Vanguard," he said softly. Vanguard Dynamics. The name felt like a lifetime ago. It was a place of innovation, of bleeding-edge performance, where he had been not just a mechanic but a lead chassis and powertrain systems engineer. He had held patents. His designs had set land speed records for commercial-class vehicles. It was a world of non-disclosure agreements, of titanium alloys and computational fluid dynamics, a world he had walked away from without a second thought the day he became a single father. He had traded it all for bedtime stories and school pickups, and he had never once regretted it. The skills, however, remained. They were dormant, not dead, embedded in his very bones. The next afternoon, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb outside the small house. Marcus Thorne stepped out, adjusting his suit. He and Elias had been friends since their university days, a classic pairing of the engineer and the lawyer. Marcus had navigated the complex legal world while Elias had navigated the physical one. He found Elias in the garage, wiping down his workbench. "Still worshipping at the altar of cleanliness, I see," Marcus said with a smile, leaning against the doorframe. "It's easier to find what you're looking for," Elias replied, his voice a low rumble. He gestured to a clean stool. "Coffee." Always, Marcus watched as Elias prepared the pour-over with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. "I came from a meeting downtown. One of my pro bono cases. A trucker, one of the guys from the Northline haulage bankruptcy. It's a mess, Elias." Elias handed him a mug. He did not say anything, but his focus was absolute. He listened. "A big developer, Albright Holdings, bought the land Northline was on," Marcus explained. "They wanted the trucks gone, so they had them all impounded. 47 rigs. These guys, they're mostly owner-operators. The trucks are their whole lives. The tow and storage fees are astronomical, around $25,000 per truck and climbing. It's a death sentence. They're ruined." Elias took a slow sip of his own coffee, his gaze distant. "Northline haulage. They used to run a test fleet for Vanguard. Back in the day. We contracted them to put our experimental long-haul components through real-world stress tests." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "Really? So you know the depot?" "I've been there," Elias said. They had a dedicated maintenance bay for the Vanguard prototypes. Bay 4. Kept it under lock and key. He fell silent, a thought taking root. The methodical, pattern-seeking part of his brain began connecting disparate points of data. A bankrupt trucking firm. A corporate developer focused on speed and bottom lines. A forgotten, specialized maintenance bay. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, recognizing the look in his friend's eyes. It was the look Elias got just before he saw the solution to a problem no one else had even properly identified. "Albright Holdings," Elias said slowly. "Are they thorough?" Marcus snorted. "They're corporate raiders in real estate clothing. They're fast and brutal, but they're not detail-oriented. They care about acreage and zoning, not what's inside some dusty old garage." "Why?" "I heard a rumor they were selling off the contents of the main building for scrap," Elias said, his voice neutral. He was probing. "They are," Marcus confirmed. "My client mentioned it. Albright's people are just trying to get it off the books. They posted a simple notice on a local government surplus site. Sale of abandoned commercial garage contents. As is, where is their asking $5,000? Elias stood up and walked to a large, flat file cabinet in the corner of his garage. He unlocked it and pulled out a rolled-up schematic. He spread it on his workbench. It was a detailed layout of the Northline haulage depot, dated 15 years ago. He pointed a steady finger at a small, sectioned-off area. Bay 4, he said. The sale is for the entire main garage, right? That's what the notice says. Why? What's in there? Maybe nothing, Elias said, though his eyes told a different story. And maybe everything, he looked at his friend. I need you to do something for me, Marcus. I want you to make an offer on my behalf. The full $5,000. But the bill of sale needs to be specific. It must state that the purchase is for all contents, assets, and appurtenances located within the structure designated Building 1, including all furniture, equipment, tools, and paperwork. Marcus stared at him, then at the schematic, and a slow grin spread across his face. Paperwork. Elias, you magnificent bastard. What do you know? I know that corporations like Albright Holdings don't see value, Elias said, his voice flat and certain. They only see cost. Let's go for a drive. I want to look at it from the fence line. They drove to the defunct depot. From the perimeter fence, it looked exactly as Catherine Albright's survey had described, a place of decay. Weeds grew through cracks in the asphalt. The massive garage doors were rusted. But Elias saw something else. He saw the reinforced roof over Bay 4. He saw the dedicated high-voltage power conduit, still intact. He saw the ghost of a place built for serious work. He did not need to go inside. He already knew. The arrogance of the new owners would be his key. They thought they were selling junk. He was certain they were selling the kingdom. David Chin sat in his cubicle, the phone pressed to his ear. On the other end was a lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, making a formal offer for the Northline garage contents. $5,000. It was more than David had expected. He had anticipated haggling with scrap dealers for $1,000 or $2,000. The bill of sale is standard, David said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. My client requires a specific addendum. Thorne's voice was calm and professional. It needs to state the sale includes all contents, physical and documentary, located within the building. Furniture, tools, equipment, and any and all filed or stored paperwork. David hesitated. This was unusual. Scrap haulers didn't care about paperwork. They cared about tonnage. I'll have to check with legal. Of course, Thorne said smoothly. But my client's offer is contingent on this language, and it's valid for 24 hours. He is prepared to wire the funds immediately upon signature. David put him on hold and sent a frantic message to the legal department. The reply came back in less than 5 minutes. Language is fine. It's boilerplate asset transfer phrasing. It just clarifies that we're not liable for anything left behind. Get it signed. Relieved, David went back to the call. The language is acceptable. Please send over your client's information. He took down the name, Elias Vance. It meant nothing to him. The paperwork landed on Catherine Albright's desk the next morning. It was buried in a stack of multi-million-dollar contracts and zoning applications. David stood before her, holding the document. Mistress Albright, this is the bill of sale for the Northline garage contents. $5,000. It just needs your signature. She did not look up from her monitor. She was tracking the real-time valuation of a commercial bond portfolio. Did they take it all? As is. Yes, Mistress Albright. The buyer's lawyer was insistent on language that transfers everything. Tools, junk, old files. It's all his problem now. Good. She reached out, took the pen from its marble holder, and scrawled her sharp, angular signature on the line without reading a single word of the contract beyond the price. It was a gnat she was swatting away. She pushed the paper back toward David. Done. Now, about the marketing prospectus for the preserve. David took the signed document. He felt a pang of something, pity, perhaps, for the poor soul who had just paid $5,000 for a building full of rust and worthless paper. He had no idea that the signature he held was not the end of a minor problem, but the beginning of a catastrophic one for Albright Holdings. 2 days later, Elias Vance stood before the massive, groaning door of the Northline haulage main garage. He held a set of bolt cutters in one hand and a single, crisp legal document in the other, the bill of sale, signed by Catherine Albright. He had already paid a locksmith to change the locks on the personnel doors. The place was his. He cut the thick, rusted chain and, with a grunt of effort, began to heave the corrugated steel door upward. It rose with a screech of protest, revealing a vast, cavernous space thick with the dust of years. Sunlight struggled through grimy clerestory windows, illuminating dancing motes and the hulking shapes of forgotten machinery. It smelled of decay, of stagnant oil and mice. To anyone else, it was a tomb. To Elias, it was a time capsule. He walked slowly into the center of the main floor, his boots echoing in the immense quiet. He ignored the scattered tools, the broken-down forklifts, the general detritus of a failed business. His eyes scanned the far wall, looking for the one thing that mattered. There it was. A simple steel door, slightly newer than the rest of the building, marked with a faded, stenciled number, 4. Bay 4. It was secured with a heavy-duty deadbolt, a silent testament to the value of what lay within. Elias produced a key from his pocket, not a copy, but an original master key he had kept from his Vanguard days, a memento he never thought he would use again. He slid it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. He pushed the door open. This room was different. While the main garage was a chaotic mess, Bay 4 was a model of order, merely covered in a thick blanket of dust. Specialized engine hoists stood silent. Diagnostic machines were shrouded in yellowed plastic covers. And against the far wall, there were 2 items that made Elias's heart beat a little faster. The first was a row of gray, military-spec filing cabinets. The second, next to them, was a large, wall-mounted steel key cabinet, also locked. He walked to the filing cabinets first. The top drawer slid open with a whisper. It was filled with hanging folders, each neatly labeled. He pulled one out. VD-07B High-Efficiency Particulate Filter Retrofit, Field Test Data. He opened another. Project Chimera, Experimental Compound Turbocharger System. This was it. The complete service history, performance data, and schematics for every prototype Vanguard had ever tested through this facility. But he was looking for something more specific. He moved to the second cabinet, the one marked Administration and Finance. He began to flip through the folders. Accounts payable, fuel receipts, driver contracts, and then he found it. A thick, 3-ring binder with a simple label on the spine, Asset Management and Liens. He placed the binder on a dusty workbench and opened it. The first page was a master agreement between Northline Haulage and its owner-operators, stating that Northline would act as the legal and financial agent for the vehicles domiciled at their depot. Page after page contained individual contracts, signed by the drivers, giving Northline power of attorney over matters related to the trucks, including financing and liens. And tucked into a sleeve in the back of the binder were 47 individual carbon copies. They were the impound notices from the tow yard, issued to Northline Haulage as the agent on record. Elias stood perfectly still. Albright Holdings had bought Northline's land and buildings, its physical assets. In doing so, they had also unknowingly absorbed its role as the legal agent for these trucks. Then, in their haste to liquidate the worthless contents of the garage, Catherine Albright had signed a document transferring ownership of everything inside, including this binder. This binder, which represented the legal authority over the truck's debts. The debts were an asset of the garage. He had not just bought old tools and junk. He had bought the $1.2 million debt. He owned it. And a debt that you own is a debt that you can forgive. He then turned his attention to the locked key cabinet. Using a small pry bar, he carefully worked the door open. It swung wide, revealing rows upon rows of hooks. On each hook hung a key ring, and on each key ring was a small plastic tag with a truck number engraved on it. The master keys for all 47 impounded trucks. He ran his hand over them, the cold metal a tangible symbol of the power he now wielded. It was a power born not of money or aggression, but of knowledge, patience, and the meticulous reading of the fine print that others, in their arrogance, had ignored. That evening, Elias made 2 phone calls. The first was to a man named Ben Carter, a a grizzled master machinist who had been his right hand at Vanguard. The second was to Anya Sharma, a logistics and supply chain genius who could source any part from any corner of the globe. Both had been laid off in the corporate restructuring that had eventually killed Vanguard Dynamics. Both were now massively overqualified for their current jobs. "Ben," Elias said when the men answered. "It's Vance." There was a pause on the other end, then a low whistle. "Elias. I'll be damned. It's been a long time. What's broken?" "Nothing's broken," Elias replied. "I'm starting something new. Something real. I'm at the old North Line depot off Route 9. I need you." He did not need to explain further. He did not need to offer a salary or benefits. For men like Ben, the chance to do meaningful work again with someone they respected was enough. "I'll be there in the morning," Ben said without hesitation. His call with Anya was similarly brief and ended with the same result. His team was assembled. It was a team of 3, but they had more expertise in high-performance trucking than most multinational corporations. They were not there to restore the trucks, however. Not yet. First, they had to liberate them. The following week was a blur of methodical preparation. While Ben and Anya began the monumental task of cataloging the treasure trove of prototype parts in Bay 4, discovering crated, zero-hour engines and experimental fuel injection systems worth millions on the specialized market, Elias and Marcus Thorne worked on the legal front. They drafted paperwork. They cross-referenced the VINs from the lien notices with the keys from the cabinet and the service records from the files. They built an ironclad case. Finally, they sent out 47 registered letters. It was not a demand for payment or a legal threat. It was an invitation. It requested the presence of each of the affected owner-operators for a meeting at a community hall Elias had rented. The letter was simple, stating only that it concerned a resolution to the matter of the impounded Northline haulage vehicles. The night of the meeting, the hall was filled with an atmosphere of dread and suspicion. The 47 drivers, men and women of all ages, sat in folding chairs, their faces etched with exhaustion and anger. They had lost everything. Their trucks were not just vehicles, they were their businesses, their homes on the road, the sum of their life's work. Now they were hostages, racking up a debt they could never hope to pay. They expected to see a lawyer from the tow company or another corporate vulture coming to pick over the bones of their careers. Instead, the man who walked to the front of the room was one of them. Or he looked like one of them. He wore clean but unassuming work clothes and held a simple binder. It was Elias. Marcus Thorne stood quietly to the side. "Good evening," Elias began, his voice calm and even, carrying across the tense room. "My name is Elias Vance. Thank you for coming." A large, bearded man in the front row stood up. "We don't have time for games, mister. If you're here to offer us a settlement of 10 cents on the dollar for our titles, you can save your breath." A murmur of angry agreement swept the room. Elias held up a hand. "I'm not here to offer you a settlement," he said. "I'm not a lawyer for the tow yard. And I don't work for Albright Holdings." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. A few weeks ago, Albright Holdings sold the contents of the main garage at the Northline depot. I was the buyer. He held up the bill of sale, its crisp white paper a stark contrast to his work-stained hands. The contract specified that the sale included all contents: furniture, tools, and paperwork. He then held up the thick binder he had taken from the filing cabinet. This was part of that paperwork. It's the asset management ledger from Northline Haulage. It contains the financial agency agreements you all signed. When Albright Holdings bought Northline's property, they became your legal agent. When they sold me the contents of the garage, they sold me this binder. And in doing so, they sold me the legal standing as your agent." He paused again, letting the complex legal truth settle. "What that means," he said, simplifying it, "is that I now own your debt." The room erupted. It was a roar of betrayal and despair. They saw him now as the ultimate predator, a man who had cleverly bought their financial ruin for pennies. The bearded man took a step forward, his fists clenched. "So you're just another shark, then? You bought our lives for scrap value." "No," Elias said, his voice cutting through the noise, firm and absolute. He walked over to a small folding table. On it was a cash box and a book of carbon copy receipts. He opened the receipt book. I'm the man who's tearing up the bill. Silence fell, thick and disbelieving. The total debt is approximately $1.2 million, Elias said, looking out at the sea of confused faces. I own it. And I am choosing to forgive it. The law requires a consideration, a payment, for the transaction to be legally binding. So, the price for me to release the lien on your vehicle, and to give you back its key, is $5. No one moved. The concept was too enormous, too contrary to the brutal logic of their recent experience. $5 to erase a $25,000 debt. It was impossible. Elias looked to the bearded men who had spoken. What's your name? Frank, the men mumbled, stunned. Frank Miller. Elias found the corresponding paperwork in his binder. He filled out a receipt. Received from Frank Miller, $5. For payment in full of all outstanding liens and fees related to Vin. He signed it. Frank, he said, holding out the receipt. Come get your key. Frank Miller walked forward as if in a trance. He handed Elias a crumpled $5 bill. Elias handed him the receipt and a key with a small plastic tag that read, TRK 07. Frank stared at the key in his palm, then at the receipt, then at Elias. His weathered face began to crumple. He did not speak. He just nodded, his throat too thick with emotion. A woman in the third row, her face pale, stood up. You're just giving them back. I'm not giving them back, Elias corrected gently. They were never mine to begin with. They're yours. I just bought the paperwork that was keeping you from them, he gestured to the table. Who's next? For the next hour, a line formed. One by one, the drivers stepped forward, their faces a mixture of disbelief, dawning hope, and overwhelming gratitude. They handed over their $5, some with shaking hands, and received a simple piece of paper that was their salvation and a key that was their future. The total sum Elias collected was $235. With it, he erased over $1 million of manufactured debt and resurrected 47 careers from the ashes of corporate indifference. The quiet hall filled with the sounds of weeping, of relieved laughter, of people calling their families to share the impossible news. Elias Vance had not just performed a legal maneuver, he had delivered a miracle. In the gleaming tower of Albright Holdings, David Chen was doing his morning media scan, a routine part of his job. He sifted through the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and then moved to more specialized industry publications. It was in a niche online journal, Long Haul Ledger, that he saw it. The headline was small, not something that would ever cross the mainstream wires, but to David, it landed like a thunderclap. Mystery benefactor erases $12 million in impound debt for 47 independent truckers. His blood ran cold. He clicked the link. The article detailed the story of the Northline drivers, their plight, and their sudden, inexplicable rescue at a community hall meeting. It mentioned the depot, the impound lot, and the name of the men who had bought and forgiven the debt, Elias Vance. David's hands began to shake. Vance. That was the name on the bill of sale. The scrap hauler. The man whose lawyer had insisted on the clause about paperwork, it all crashed down on him at once, the specificity of the contract language, the $5,000 price, the speed of the transaction. It was not a sale of scrap. It had been a surgical extraction. He frantically pulled the digital file for the Northline sale. He reread the contract, his eyes locking on the addendum he had thought so little of, including all furniture, equipment, tools, and any and all filed or stored paperwork. He then cross-referenced the property acquisition files, pulling up the bankruptcy transfer from Northline. Buried deep in the legal appendices was the schedule of intangible assets, which included the active agency and asset management agreements for the owner-operator fleet. They had bought it. And then they had sold it. For $5,000. David felt a wave of nausea. He had personally walked that document into Catherine Albright's office. He had watched her sign away a $1.2 million asset, and the legal high ground, with a flick of her wrist. He spent the rest of the night not sleeping, but preparing. He compiled the bill of sale, the original Northline acquisition contract, the article from the Long Haul Ledger, and a stark, one-page legal analysis of the liability and public relations exposure. He knew that showing this to Catherine Albright would be the most terrifying moment of his career. The next morning, he stood before her desk, his hands clammy. Mistress Albright, he began, his voice strained. There is a significant problem regarding the North Line Depot liquidation. She looked up, annoyed at the interruption and the gravity in his tone. David, I signed that paper. It's done. Move on. I'm afraid it isn't, he said, laying the documents on her pristine desk. The Trucking Journal article was on top. This was published yesterday. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the headline with disdain, which quickly morphed into confusion, and then into a cold, sharp fury he had never seen up close. She read the article twice, her knuckles white where she gripped the tablet. She then looked at the bill of sale with her signature on it, and then at David's grim-faced analysis. She did not speak for a full minute. The silence in the office was absolute, terrifying. Explain this to me, she finally said, her voice dangerously quiet. Explain to me how we paid millions for a piece of land, only to give away a $1.2 million controlling interest in the vehicles we paid to remove from it. David walked her through it, step by agonizing step. He explained the agency agreements. He explained the bill of sale. He explained how their own haste and their focus on the physical junk had blinded them to the intangible asset, the paperwork, that was infinitely more valuable. He did not make excuses. He simply stated the facts. He had facilitated the transaction. He had been the point of contact. But the final decision, the signature, had been hers. When he was finished, she leaned back in her chair, her face a mask of controlled rage. She was not looking at him, but through him, her mind rapidly calculating the consequences. The financial loss was trivial to a company of her scale, an annoyance. The humiliation, however, was galling. The strategic blunder was unacceptable. But worst of all was the loss of control. Some quiet, insignificant men had outmaneuvered her completely, using her own dismissive arrogance as his primary weapon. Find him, she ordered, her voice like chipping ice. Find this Elias Vance. Arrange a meeting. I want to see him. The meeting was not set in a boardroom. Elias refused. He agreed to meet, but only at his garage. 2 days later, a gleaming black Audi A8, a car that looked alien and obscene in the humble, working-class neighborhood, purred to a stop in front of his house. Catherine Albright emerged, her severe suit and expensive leather shoes completely out of place on the gravel driveway. David Chin followed a few steps behind, looking pale and miserable. She strode into the open bay of the garage as if she owned it. Elias did not rise to greet her. He was sitting on a low stool, meticulously cleaning the gears of a truck's transmission with a solvent and a small brush. In the corner, Lily was at her desk, quietly drawing, a small island of peace in the impending storm. Mr. Vance, Catherine began, her voice resonating with forced authority. I am Catherine Albright. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Elias continued to wipe down a gear, inspecting it under the bright work light before setting it carefully on a clean rag. He did not look at her. Everything I have, I bought, he said, his voice low and even. I have a receipt. Her jaw tightened. The quiet defiance, the utter lack of intimidation, infuriated her. You're a clever man, Mr. Vance. You found a loophole. I can appreciate that. But you have made your point. Now, let's be practical. That paperwork you acquired has created a complication. I am prepared to buy it back from you. Let's say, $100,000. A handsome profit on your $5,000 investment. Elias finally stopped his work. He placed the brush down and slowly turned on his stool to face her. His eyes were calm, steady, and held no trace of fear or avarice. They simply held her gaze, and for the first time in a very long time, Catherine Albright felt her own authority begin to fray. The debt is settled, Mistress Albright, he said simply. Everything has a price, she countered, mistaking his principle for a negotiating tactic. $250,000. That's my final offer. You can use it to expand this shop, she glanced around the garage with unconcealed disdain. Elias looked past her, at his daughter, who was watching them with wide, serious eyes. He gave her a small, reassuring nod before turning back to Catherine. You still don't understand, he said, and his voice was not angry, but held a note of something like pity. You think the paperwork was the valuable thing. You think this is about money. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. He was not a large man, but he possessed a stillness, a centeredness that made her corporate power seem brittle and theatrical. You sold the contents of a building. In that building was a binder. That binder was a liability you didn't want. I took it. The problem is solved. It's over. I could make things very difficult for you, she hissed, her composure finally cracking. I could sue. I could tie you up in litigation for years. It was Marcus Thorne who answered, stepping out from the small office at the back of the garage. He had been there the whole time. On what grounds, he asked, his voice pleasant but firm. Breach of contract. The contract your client signed, which explicitly transferred all documentary assets. Your case would be laughed out of court, and the discovery process would be a public relations disaster. The story of a multi-billion-dollar corporation trying to claw back a debt it sold for $5,000, a debt that was forgiven for 47 working families. I'd almost be willing to defend Elias for free, just to watch. Catherine stared from Elias's calm face to Marcus's confident one. She saw the checkmate. Her power, the power of money and lawyers and intimidation, was useless here. It could find no purchase on a man who wanted nothing she could offer. She had come to assert dominance and had found herself completely impotent. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stalked out of the garage, her expression a thunderous mask of humiliation. David Chin gave Elias a brief, almost apologetic glance before scurrying after her. The aftermath was quiet but decisive. The 47 drivers, bound to Elias by a fierce, unshakable loyalty, did not disperse. They had their trucks, and they had a leader they trusted implicitly. Frank Miller, the bearded driver, acted as their spokesman. We owe you everything, Elias, he said, standing in the garage a few days later, a dozen other drivers behind him. Most of us were ready to declare bankruptcy. You didn't just save our trucks, you saved our families. We want to work for you. With you. And so, a new business was born. It was not a trucking company in the traditional sense. Elias had no interest in hauling freight. His plan was far more ambitious. He, Ben, and Anya had spent weeks cataloging the contents of Bay 4. They had found 3 sealed crates containing complete, zero-hour Chimera systems, the experimental compound turbocharger and fuel injection kits that Vanguard had been developing when it went under. They were years ahead of their time, capable of increasing fuel efficiency by 30% while boosting horsepower. They were priceless, as they had never gone into production. Elias founded Vance Precision Systems. His business model was simple. He did not sell the parts. He used his new, loyal fleet of 47 drivers as a rolling testbed and showcase. He retrofitted their trucks with the Vanguard prototypes and his own custom-tuned modifications. His drivers, with their radically superior fuel economy and performance, began to dominate the regional freight market, underbidding competitors while still earning more profit. News travels fast in the tight-knit world of trucking. Soon, large fleet owners were calling, wanting to know how Frank Miller's 30-year-old rig was outperforming their brand-new models. Elias began taking on retrofitting contracts, installing his unique, high-performance systems for a select clientele. His shop expanded. He hired more skilled technicians, many of them old Vanguard colleagues who had been scattered to the winds. He built a new, larger facility on a plot of industrial land he bought for cash. On the front of the clean, modern building was a simple, understated sign, Vance Precision. Months later, Catherine Albright stood on the future site of the Blackwood Preserve. It was not a bustling construction site. It was a field of mud. The project was stalled, mired in zoning challenges amplified by a local council suddenly sympathetic to the plight of the working class, a sympathy fueled by the quiet lobbying of the now powerful local truckers' union. The bad press from the Northline incident had stuck to her, a stain she could not wipe away. As she stood there, fuming at the delays, a sound grew on the nearby highway. It was the rumble of heavy diesel engines. A convoy of immaculate semi-trucks, their chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun, rolled past. There were nearly 50 of them, moving with the power and grace of a perfectly synchronized machine. On the door of each truck was a small, discreet logo, a stylized V over a gear. It was his brand. They were his trucks. They were a testament to a victory that was not loud or explosive, but quiet, methodical, and absolute. They were rolling past the monument to her failure, on their way to a future she had discarded as junk. That evening, the lights were on in the new, spacious Vance Precision garage. But Elias was not in the main bay. He was in his old, original garage behind the house, which he had kept exactly as it was. It was his sanctuary. Lily was there with him, standing on a sturdy stool. She was holding a small torque wrench, her small hands guided by his larger ones as they tightened the bolts on a valve cover. "A little more," he said softly. "Wait for the click." The wrench clicked, a small, satisfying sound in the quiet space. Lily looked up at him, her face beaming with pride. "I did it," she whispered. "Yes, you did," he said, a rare, warm smile spreading across his face. He looked around the small, orderly garage, the place where it had all begun. He had not set out to defeat Catherine Albright. He had not sought wealth or power. He had simply seen value where she saw none, not just in the forgotten parts and paperwork, but in the people whose lives she had dismissed. He had achieved a success far greater than any financial metric could capture, and he had done it on his own terms, without sacrificing the quiet, methodical life he had built for himself and his daughter. He was not a corporate titan. He was a master of his craft, a father, and a man who understood that true worth is not found on a balance sheet, but in the things you build, the loyalty you earn, and the quiet satisfaction of a job done right.